Bored Hermit says, love the fanfic section in webcam, bud. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what Bored Hermit is talking about, I do a newsletter. It's fortnightly. It's free. It's with Crikey, and Crikey send it out not only to all of their subscribers, but also all of the people who've signed up for their trials. So I can tell. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but I think that it actually goes to about 140,000 email addresses. Now I'm sure like a bunch of those are no longer in use. There's a pretty decent chunk of people who get it. I've been doing it. This is my 8th edition now of webcam. I write about Australian internet things, and I've been trying to like get a little bit more and more weird each time. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I'll start off fairly normal. I'll talk about TikTok, that kind of stuff. But I have a section of the newsletter which I call Content Corner, which is where I talk about just some, different stuff they haven't seen on the internet. And this week, as part, I had the start of the newsletter very serious. I was talking about how people do care about their privacy, even if they use things like Facebook. It's just that, unfortunately, we don't, you can either exist in normal society and use Facebook so you can attend birthday parties and things, or you can live off the grid, which is extremely inconvenient to most people. So there's that. Or, so you can do that, or you can opt out of society. So that was the first part. Very serious. I used like stats. I talked about legislation, international tech developments. And in the second half, I talked about Auspol Fanfic, which is like, for those, I'm sure many of you would already know this, but Fanfic is erotic fiction about well-known characters, almost entirely same sex. And yeah, it's like obviously sexual, but it's also, it's subversive because it's a way of, particularly the queer community, playing with traditionally heteronormative characters and doing, having fun with them. And it's usually things like Harry Potter or Marvel or like Star Trek or Star Wars, but people have also done some about Australian political figures. And so this week's edition that I sent to like 144,000 people includes stories about the relationship between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott once they got saved from protesters. There's something about Dan Andrews and Brett Sutton. There's something about Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott. All the good stuff. And Chris Booth, does this count as defamation? I really hope not. Bored Hermit, you should have sent me some of yours. I didn't know which one was yours. I'm sorry. I definitely would have put it in otherwise. But that is, so I sent that out to 140,000 people, and I've only gotten good reviews so far. So, the people love what they get. I want you to think about how much news content you've consumed lately. How much attention have you paid to news headlines and that kind of things? I mean, I work in the news, and even I've switched off a bit. I've seen from the traffic that I think, our website is getting, that people are becoming less interested in it. People have now just spent the last 18 months or year and a bit, whatever it was, paying attention to the news because of COVID, and everyone just wants to switch off. Everyone is, most people are vaccinated. Most people have been stuck inside. The weather's getting really nice. People just want to go out, forget the news, live actual lives. I think, every summer we say that people switch off. We say that voters stop paying attention. They go and see their family. They stop reading headlines. They, go outside and touch grass. They stop watching Twitch or whatever. I think we're going to see something like that, like we have never seen before. I think, I swear that is going to be like If last summer was like hot vax summer, this would be like no fact summer. Like no one wants to learn a single thing. All they want to do is just vibe, just chill. So with that in mind, I think like what Scott Morrison and the government is doing is they are saying, we're going to get our dirty laundry out of the way. We're going to address things so that like when particular areas that we don't really want to talk about too much are brought up, we can say we've done something on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to leave it over the summer. Everyone's going to forget. Everyone's going to go outside and touch grass. And then next year, in the lead up to the election, whenever it is, if it's in March, if it's in May, people are going to, that's when we're going to talk about topics that we really care about. And we'll see that. It was like, yeah, Bond Matthew says we've moved on. It's exactly like we saw when we saw Scott Morrison talk about the Macron thing. He is so good at being like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to be drawn in that. All I'm going to do is talk about what I want to talk about. And next year, I think it's going to be things like, I swear, I've been talking about this for a while. I swear he's going to be talking about social media, about protecting children. That is going to be a big thing. That's what he's going to want to talk about. He's going to want to talk about the fact that he has, that people can now go out and not, need to be stuck inside because of vaccines. He's going to be talk about opening up Australia. That same kind of like a choice, not mandates kind of argument. He's going to, I wouldn't be surprised if there's something around national security and an attempt to, there was reporting in the Saturday paper a few weeks ago about how he was going to, or the government was thinking about passing legislation that it was hoping to wedge Labor on this topic about, they were going to set up a test to deport people who had been convicted of family violence thing. And the whole point was to be like, well, are we going to wedge Labor on the idea of setting women's stuff versus border security? Anyway, I'm not trying to get into that, what they're actually going to talk about too much. Oh, hey, Mediocre Soup, nice to have you. I'm just talking about how the fact that at the moment, like, Scott Morrison is like cleaning out the cupboard. He is getting rid of all the policies that he knows that people care enough about, but are not the topics he wants to talk about. And so he'll be able to say, for all of next year into the lead up in the election, they will talk about things that they want to. And every time someone talks about, hey, Mr. Prime Minister, just a question about your environmental policy. We've seen emissions go up, and he'll just interrupt and he'll just say, we have a plan to get to net zero by 2050, and we have a plan, and that's it. That's, in fact, if anything, he might want to even try and, he might end up talking about it, but he might be trying to turn it into attack against Labor if they do commit to something higher. Who knows how that'll go. But the whole point is, he is not going to be caught out saying that he doesn't have something to talk about because he's dealt with it. But also the time for scrutiny is over. It's left in 2021. It's not now. This is like all set up just to set up next year to talk about the issues they want to talk about. And I want to show you something that proves this. I'll zoom out first and say that, actually, no, I'll point out something that shows what I'm talking about. This is Essential Polling, which comes out every 2 weeks. It's a pollster who are quite high quality. And every 2 weeks, they kind of talk about different things. But here is something interesting. How would you rate the federal government's response to the COVID-19 outbreak? And what they've done is they've tested it every 2 weeks for the past 7 months. And if you look down here, now you remember that they were getting smashed by Labor in the middle of the year because vaccines hadn't rolled out, quarantine facilities in hotels were failing, people were spending thousands of dollars to be quarantined. There was a lot of criticism while the rest of the world was starting to open back up. And so you'll see that if you look down, so it goes from right to left here. In March, they're at 62. People were saying 62% were thinking that the federal government had done a good job. So this was just after vaccines started to be rolled out. Australian death totals were low. Things were going well. And then as we get closer towards the middle of the year, as more criticism was about the mediocre vaccine rollout initially, their approval and that started to drop until in, is that August? Yeah, August, they were down to 38% of the electorate thought that they had done a good job versus 35% thought they had done a poor job. So that was really, and at the time, you know, the Labour was totally hammering them on being like, it's all about vaccines and they've stuffed it up. And people were saying that vaccines are going to be the big issue in the next election. But kind of at the time, I was like, the reason that he's going to have this election late in 2022 or as late as possible is because this hasn't been going well. But as vaccines roll out, as they inevitably will, people will feel better about it and they'll get over it. And that's exactly what we've seen happen. So it's gone up to 41%, and then September 45%, and now it's back up to 48% of people think that the federal government has done a good job on dealing with COVID versus 29%. So that's a positive rating of 19% versus just 3 months ago. Oh my God. 3 months ago, there was a 3% difference between those two numbers. So I guess, you know, the reason that I bring up these stats, which probably isn't super exciting to hear about, is because voters, and it's such a weird way to talk about them, they're just people. People kind of don't, people think about the current position that they're in. And yes, some things will last. And I think the fact that the government didn't deal with COVID that well in terms of the initial vaccine rollout, even though things are really, really good right now. Like, you know, the New South Wales is, I think, are we at 94% with our first dose? Like, we're killing it. Anyway, Australia is doing really, really well in terms of vaccines compared with around the world. So that's part of the reason why things have gotten better. But also, people's memories fade, and that makes sense. And so, like, my prediction is by the time the election comes around next year, which I would not be surprised to see would be as late as possible, when, we won't need lockdowns anymore, when everyone just decides that we've got as many people vaccinated as possible, hospitals can deal if anything goes worse, booster shots will be rolling out, people will be like, do you know what? We went through a deadly pandemic, we survived, not that many Australians died compared to what it could have been. Oh, like, you know, the fact that it was kind of a slow rollout, well, like, not great, but that's so long ago. It doesn't matter now. They'll be saying what matters now is the fact that it's all working well. And I think we'll see the same with stuff like environmental policy to a lesser extent. They will be like, so Zales brings up a good point. I really hope people remember the bushfire response. People will. Like, people will remember these things, and some people will always hold the vaccine rollout against them. And that, you know, that makes sense. But we're talking about so many people at once. And I think for a lot of people, because of the way that we like think about things, like when we were dealing with the vaccines shortages, I don't really think that anyone was saying, but also don't forget about the bushfires, because we had something bigger on our mind at the time. The whole point of the election campaign is to put things in the front of voters' minds that are bigger. And the idea is that people won't be thinking about bushfires. They won't be thinking about the vaccines because they'll be thinking about other big topics that will take up, that will start debates, start discussions, take up debates. Carl says a 16% improvement in 3 months. The pandemic handling will be an asset by May. Yeah, I think so. I think everyone will say that things did well. Hey, thank you, Themistoclea. Nice to have you here. I agree. I think that the pandemic response will end up being a net positive for this government, as it's been for most governments around the world. Sad bots. New South Wales and Vic Govs will have to take the heat from the mandates. Yeah, let's have a look at the stats, because I haven't actually checked that out. So they've done the same thing for how would you rate your state government's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. I'm guessing that this is good. So New South Wales is up from our lockdowns and our outbreak. Victoria's up, even though they're currently debating the in this permanent pandemic law, which I haven't really paid attention to, I have to be honest. Queensland continues to be pretty happy about how they've handled it. South Australia, and look at that. Look at WA. WA with God Emperor Mark McGowan, who has just remained so popular because he has locked them down like North Korea. And hey, it's paying off for him. So, I mean, I think, like, look, even still, when you look at the positive ratings, those positive ratings are actually higher than the federal government. And I know you probably can't directly compare them, but like the federal government, at least in these ratings, has come off worse than the state government. So I do think that the federal government, even though they tried to offboard as much of this to other people, they have actually suffered as a consequence of the COVID outbreak.